This is such a great survival movie with the perfect amount of comedic relief. Let's do it. Ready or Not opens up with these two little boys running around this mansion, and this man comes up to them frantic, clearly injured and in distress, begging them for help. Instead of helping, one of the little boys, Daniel, yells for his family that he's over here. The family comes in wearing robes and masks, and there's a bride whose name is Helene, and she's crying and screaming. But the family doesn't give a fuck. They shoot this man with a spear gun and kill him. We jump to 30 years later, and we meet Alex, who was the other little boy in the beginning, Daniel's brother. He's about to marry his beautiful fiancée, Grace. Now, Alex is part of the Ladomas family who is just dumb rich because they own this really successful game company. And they make it pretty clear that Alex has been estranged from his family. He hasn't interacted with them a whole lot. But Grace, being a foster child, pushes him to connect with his family because she wants to be part of that because she's never really had it. Alex agrees and they go to have their wedding on the family estate, and her wedding day is literally the first day that she meets any of the Ladomas family. This includes Daniel, who's the kid that we had seen earlier, Alex's brother, his wife Charity, who is just immediately a bitch and is talking about Grace like she'll never be one of us, Alex's sister Emily, who is just doing drugs the whole time, her husband Fitch and their two young sons, Alex's mother Becky, Alex's dad Tom, and Alex's aunt Helene, who we had met Helene in the opening scene. They get married, everything's beautiful. And after the ceremony, Alex informs Grace, hey, there's a family tradition that we have to play tonight. At midnight, we have to go down and play a game with my family. It's tradition. We do it every time somebody gets married. So Grace is hesitant, but she goes. And when she gets there, Alex's father explains that years prior, his ancestor, Victor Ladomas, made a deal with somebody called Mr. LaBelle. Basically, the family would be super successful and rich if they observed this tradition and played this game. And the tradition is, every time somebody marries into the family, they have to play this game at midnight, and the card that they pick determines what the game is. So they pull out Mr. LaBelle's puzzle box and hand it over to Grace so she could pick a card. We've seen that Alex has been super stressed out about this whole thing. Grace pulls a card, and sure enough, it says hide and seek, which is the one card you don't want to get. Grace thinks it's funny, and she goes off and she hides, thinking they're just playing hide and seek. Meanwhile, we watch the family weapon up. Grace hides, and after a while, she's like, okay, I've had enough. So she goes to go back to her room when Alex pulls her in. Grace is super confused until she looks and sees Emily kill a maid, thinking that it's Grace. The family comes in yelling at her. It is like, why would you do a kill shot? Like, we have to keep her alive. So Alex explains to Grace this is why he distanced himself from the family. Because basically there is a curse on the family, and if the person on their wedding night pulls the hide and seek card, they have to be hunted. Then they are going to be ritually sacrificed, and if they're not by dawn, the whole family will die. The last time this happened was 30 years prior with Aunt Helene's husband, and that's what we saw in the opening scene. The whole mansion is completely locked down, but Alex makes a plan with Grace and is like, I'm going to disable the security system. You're going to run out. You're going to meet me here. She ends up running directly into Daniel. Now, Daniel seems like he doesn't want to fucking be here. He wants no part in it, but he basically tells her they have to do it, but he lets Grace have a head start before alerting his family where she is. The rest of the family runs in. Of course, they don't find her, and Emily ends up killing another maid in the process, and it's just like a lot funnier than it should be. So Grace goes to escape through the kitchen door, but in the kitchen, she runs into the family's butler, Stevens. Mind you, at this point, she's armed herself with the gun that she found in the game room, which gives her this iconic look. She goes to shoot Stevens, but it turns out the bullets are props, so it doesn't work. So instead, she throws boiling hot tea in his face and escapes. Grace runs into another maid who starts to yell to alert the family that she's there, but then she gets herself crushed in a dumbwaiter and dies. So Grace manages to get outside to the shed where she runs into one of Emily's sons who proceeds to shoot her through the hand, and she just fucking punches him in the face. Now, Grace ends up getting startled and she falls into this pit where she falls on top of the decomposing bodies of all the Ladomas' other victims. Grace has to climb up where she just puts her hand directly through a fucking nail, so she is like beat up at this point. And it gets even worse when she escapes and gets through the gate, which she has to force herself through, which straight up just cuts her stomach open. Grace makes a good run for it, but ultimately she is captured by Stevens and put in the backseat of a car as he drives her back to the Ladomases. In this hilarious moment when the family is FaceTiming with Stevens and his music is too loud for him to hear what's going on, Grace emerges from the back seat and just kicks the shit out of him, which causes him to crash and flip the car. But that doesn't help her because she gets out and Daniel is there waiting for her in the woods and captures her and brings her back to the house, which we find out is only because he knew his father was there too, watching. So Grace wakes up strapped to a table, now surrounded by the family in these hooded cloaks. But as the dad goes to stab her, he suddenly stops and the whole family starts vomiting and keeling over. Because it turns out Daniel put hydrochloric acid in the ritual cup that they all drank from. Daniel frees her from the table and Grace makes a run for it. But Charity finds Daniel helping Grace and shoots him in the neck, her own husband, because she's like, I would rather die than go back to being poor. Girl. So Daniel dies and Grace makes a run for it, and eventually she runs into Becky. A fight ensues between the two of them and a candle is knocked over, so the place starts to go up in flames. Ultimately, Grace gets the best of Becky and beats her to death with LaBelle's puzzle box. Alex at this point has been restrained because the family learned that he was trying to help Grace escape. He runs to find Grace killing his mother. He looks at Grace and is just like, you're never gonna be with me after this, are you? Bitch, what the fuck do you think? So he realizes at this point that he's already lost her, and he grabs her and calls to alert his family that she's there. This trifling motherfucker. The family once again straps Grace to this table. This time Alex goes to kill her, but she's able to move out of the way, which causes him to only stab her in the shoulder, and she gets off the table. Grace, now a completely bloodied mess, pulls the knife out of her own shoulder and holds it up to them. And then the sun begins to rise, so they failed. They didn't sacrifice her in time. And nothing happens. So they're all like, oh, we've been doing this for nothing? Aunt Helene, being the bitch she is like, I don't care, the girl still dies, and goes to charge at Grace. As she's doing so, she literally bursts. She explodes into just a bloody pulp. The rest of the family starts to explode one by one. Grace just stands there watching it and just laughing. Eventually, it's just Grace and Alex, and he begs Grace to forgive him. And she just looks at him and says, I want a divorce. And then he fucking explodes in her face. After this happens, Grace looks at Mr. LaBelle's chair and sees an apparition of him who kind of just nods at her in approval and then disappears. The final shot we get is Grace walking out of the burning house and lighting up a cigarette as we hear sirens in the distance. Police arrive and approach her and ask what happened, and she just says in-laws, and the movie ends with us wondering how the fuck she's gonna explain this.